Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Jet Foundation's DMD community webinar on the FDA approval of NS Pharma's VILTEPSO. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Danielle Edwards. I am Jet Foundation's Community Engagement Manager and have been part of the organization now for almost 4 years. We are so excited to have this session today with Julian and a few others from NS Pharma to learn more about the approval, details about the treatment, a Q&A session, and some more. For any questions you may have, please drop them in the chat section below. NS Pharma will be available after to take questions and answers. We're just going to wait a few more minutes to allow some more attendees to join before we begin. So just please hold on for a few more seconds, and thank you all so much again for joining us. Hi, good afternoon. Again, for all of you who are just getting on, thank you so much for joining Jet Foundation's community webinar on the FDA approval of NS Pharma's VILTEPSO. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Danielle Edwards. I am Jet Foundation's Community Engagement Manager, and I've been a part of the organization for almost 4 years. We're so excited to have this informational session today with the NS Pharma team to learn more about the approval, details about the treatment, and some Q&A sessions at the end. For any questions you may have, please drop them in the chat section below. NS Pharma will be available for live questions and answers immediately following the presentation. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And with that being said, I will pass it over to you, Julian, and we can start this presentation. Enjoy.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is Julian. I'm a medical science liaison for NS Pharma, and together with Randy, we will be sharing some very important information. We'd like to start by saying how excited and happy we are after this milestone. There has been a lot of work and effort by a lot of NS Pharma's employees, and we do know that nothing of this would have been possible without our patients, without our healthcare professionals, the families of our patients, and the whole DMD community. So we will talk about the VILTEPSO, and which is a new FDA-approved treatment for patients that are amenable to exon 53 skipping therapy. Next slide. Okay. So some important information regarding the indication and important safety information as well. VILTEPSO was indicated for the treatment of patients that have been genetically diagnosed with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and are amenable to exon 53 skipping therapy. It is important to know that this indication is approved and was approved under accelerator approval based on our outcomes, which were increase in dystrophin production in skeletal muscles on patients that were given VILTEPSO. And this approval will continue for this indication and may be contingent upon verification on further information by confirmatory trials that are undergoing at the moment. Regarding important safety information, it is important to know that even though none of our patients experience any type of kidney toxicity during their treatment with VILTEPSO, it is suggested that patients be followed up before they're given treatment for their renal function. So it is suggested that they can have certain tests as serum cystatin C, urine dipstick, and urine protein to creatinine ratio to be able to measure their renal function. And in some cases, it's also considered measuring the GFR, which is a glomerular filtration rate, before starting VILTEPSO. The adverse reactions that some of the patients had during our clinical trials included upper respiratory tract infection, injection on the site reaction, cough, and pyrexia. The objectives of this presentation are four. We will talk about the role of exon skipping on the treatment of patients with DMD. We will also mention the efficacy of VILTEPSO on patients that were given VILTEPSO. I will describe the safety and tolerability of VILTEPSO's profile, and at the end we will go over and very importantly, over the patient's services that are available for patients that will require treatment with VILTEPSO from NS Pharma. So, as the general landscape of Duchenne's, it is a rare pediatric neuromuscular disorder that affects approximately 1 in 3,500 to 5,000 live male births. Although it is rare, it is the most common cause of form of inherited muscular disorder in childhood. And the life of the disease and the way it keeps on progressing is that in time, patients will lose their muscular function. Eventually, they will lose their ambulation. That eventually will affect their respiratory muscles, which will lead to respiratory failure and cardiac dysfunction. Even though it is a condition that mainly affects boys in certain circumstances, girls can carry the gene and they can be affected, but it's always in milder forms than in boys. At the moment, there is no cure for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. There are certain treatments, such as steroids, that reduce the inflammation in the muscles and are the mainstay of treatment. It is also very important that patients have respiratory care and physical therapy to be able to prolong their muscle function. And also, it is, as the heart is involved, the heart is also a muscle, it is important that patients are given cardiac therapy as ACE inhibitors and beta blockers to decrease the deterioration of the cardiac muscle. Usually, the patient's journey with the Duchenne's, around the age of 2 to 3 years of age, they will start manifesting their symptoms, and families will notice those symptoms. By the age of 4, usually patients will be diagnosed, and then by the age of 10 to 12, they will have a loss of ambulation. For exon skipping therapy for patients that are amenable to VILTEPSO, approximately 8 to 10% of patients with DMD will be able to be treated with VILTEPSO. As we can see in the second bullet point, we can see the different type of deletions for which patients that have been genetically diagnosed, VILTEPSO will be amenable. And it is important to note here as well that patients that have a deletion of exon 52 that are being treated with exon 51 skipping therapy can also be given exon 53 skipping therapy, such as VILTEPSO. The way VILTEPSO is intended to be given to patient is as a once weekly 60-minute infusion of 80 milligrams per kilogram for patients that have been previously diagnosed and are amenable to exon 53 skipping therapy. What we can see in the diagram to the right is that we can see a figure of how a healthy gene is structured. Then right next to it, we can see how in this type of cases, there's an exon that is missing. What VILTEPSO is intended to do is to be able to allow us to have a proper reading frame in such a case that we will be able to skip that exon so that eventually we can have and produce a shortened dystrophin protein for those patients. So in this slide, what we can see is the two clinical trials for which VILTEPSO was given. And the one on the top, we can see the phase 2 trial that was done in North America, and in the one on the bottom, we can see the phase 1/2 study that was done in Japan. And what we can see here was that there are two cohorts. Both were in patients, in 16 patients, both studies. We can see in the one on the top how we had 8 patients that were given 40 milligrams per kilogram, and then another 8 patients that were given 80 milligrams per kilogram. A muscle biopsy was done before VILTEPSO was given. For a period, 6 patients were placed and were given 40 milligrams per kilogram, while 2 patients were placed in placebo. And the same was done with the other 8 patients, where 5 patients were given 80 milligrams per kilogram and 3 patients were placed on placebo. After week 5, all patients were given the proper therapy, and then at week 25, a muscle biopsy was taken. The primary outcomes that were intended to be measured were safety, tolerability, and dystrophin production through Western blot. There were other secondary outcomes that were intended to measure, as well as dystrophin production through RT-PCR, spectrometry, immunofluorescence, and motor function tests, the 6-minute walk test, time to climb, time to run and walk, time to stand, and Non-Ambulatory test, and muscle strength. In the diagram to the below, we can see the study design as well for 16 patients in the study that was done in Japan, and our primary outcome was also to be able to determine the amount of dystrophin production through Western blot and secondary outcomes, as well as functional assessments. What is important to note in this slide is that we have the different characteristics of the patients that were included in the US trial. So it's important to note here that the youngest patients were 4.3 years, and for the 40 milligram group, and for the 80 milligram group, there were 4.8 years of age. We can see here as well the other demographic characteristics of the patients. The majority of the patients, 15 out of 16, were white. One of them was of Asian race, and the inclusion criteria for this trial were all patients who were properly diagnosed genetically for exon 53 skipping therapy, ages between 4 and less than 10 years of age, able to walk independently without the assistance of any devices, were able to complete time to stand and walk, time to run and walk, time to climb assessments. They had normal clinically safety lab results, and they were in a stable glucocorticoid therapy for more than 3 months. What we can see in this slide is how for the group of patients that were given 80 milligrams per kilogram per week, we have a marked increase on dystrophin production. So we can see how at baseline, on average, they had a dystrophin production of 0.6%. And after VILTEPSO was given to those patients, there was a marked increase to nearly 6% of dystrophin production with a statistically significant p-value. And in the next slide, what we can see in this slide, is how for each one of those 8 patients, we can see how in 100% of them, there was an increase in dystrophin production that was statistically significant. So what we have here in different bars is all the 8 patients, and we can see how for 88% of those patients, there was an increase of dystrophin levels above 3%. What's important to note here is that there's, as we saw in the previous slides, is that there is a marked increase in dystrophin production. But what we can see here in this immunofluorescence staining is that we can see where the dystrophin is actually localized in different areas of the muscle. So we know that besides the production of dystrophin, we are also sure that dystrophin is properly localized in the muscle to be able to work properly. Regarding the safety profile of VILTEPSO, we can see how as we mentioned before, we had the most common adverse reactions as upper respiratory tract infection, injection site reaction, cough, and pyrexia. But it's also very important to note that there were no serious adverse events. There were no adverse events that required therapy to be discontinued, and there were no deaths during the study. So for there's different ways in which VILTEPSO can be given. It can be either at home or in a treatment center. It has to be, as we mentioned before, at 80 milligram per kilogram weekly intravenous infusion. The appropriate dose is calculated based upon the patient's weight with the before mentioned dose. And usually that infusion takes over 60 minutes by a healthcare professional at a center or at home. So summarizing what we just previously saw is that for 100% of the patients that received VILTEPSO in the 80 milligram per kilogram group, we saw that there was a marked increase in dystrophin production when compared to baseline. We can have those patients have the therapy, the IV infusion at a treatment center or at home, can be administered by a healthcare professional. And the safety profile is a very robust one after we evaluated the 24-week clinical studies. And as we saw, the most common adverse reactions were upper respiratory tract infection, injection site reaction, cough, and pyrexia. But none of those adverse events required discontinuation of therapy at all. Now I'll hand it over to Randy.
Thanks, Jillian, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy McGonigal, and as Jillian mentioned, I'm going to be walking you all through an introduction to our access support service platform, which we call NS Support. Before I do that, I want to just take a second and by background, if I can advance the slide here. Just give you all a brief description of our company. Our company is called NS Pharma. NS Pharma is a wholly owned subsidiary of Nippon Shinyaku. It's a company that's based in Kyoto, Japan. NS Pharma has been the sponsor of the trials that Jillian went through with you, and we're very excited to launch our first of what we hope to be many medications in the United States. A little bit about Nippon Shinyaku. It's our parent company. It was founded a little more than 100 years ago, and its core focus is in really 4 areas. So drugs for the treatment of rare diseases, like we're talking about for DMD, urological diseases, hematology, and gynecology. So again, I'm here to talk about NS support. NS support was created by NS Pharma as a patient support program with dedicated case managers to help patients, their families, and the healthcare providers to obtain information such as benefit investigation, enrollment into copay support, and information about product administration. And this can be done in a variety of sites of care, such as a hospital outpatient department or even in the home setting. So our NS support team consists of customer service representatives, case managers, and field-based directors of patient access. The NS support customer service team will be available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We wanted to expand those hours to make sure that we adequately service patients and their families from coast to coast. Each patient enrolled in the NS support program will be assigned a personal case manager that has extensive knowledge with various insurance plans. These folks will actually be conducting the benefit investigations on behalf of each patient. The case manager will be the family's go-to person to help manage access, reimbursement, and care coordination questions. Just as each patient and family has their own personal case manager, each healthcare provider, so your physician and their practice, will be assigned a dedicated director of patient access. These are folks that are field-based from coast to coast, and these individuals have extensive experience to provide physicians and office staff with questions and answers with regard to access and affordability support. So let's talk a little bit more about the NS support program. Okay, once a start form has been received, and I'm going to talk about the start form here in a few seconds, a completed patient start form from the physician and a support provide rapid benefit investigation and verification. Once the start form comes in, we want to turn around the benefit investigation within 24 to 48 hours. NS support will also offer prior authorization assistance and exceptions and appeals information. This is basically research based on each patient's individual insurance. We will communicate that to the provider. However, prior authorization reports and exceptions and appeals assistance is fairly limited. So while we can help the physician with doing research, we cannot fill out information contained in the prior authorization request, things like medical information, and submit that to the payer. That's the responsibility of your doctor. But when we conduct medical benefits and we send that information back to the provider, we'll contact the patient's families and have a welcome call. We'll explain the benefits and copay costs and offer insight about infusion site care options, and also provide ongoing support, including follow-up calls throughout the patient journey. This all starts with the initiation and submission of the start form, which is completed by the parent or caregiver and the physician. I know out-of-pocket costs and cost of medication is an important question and consideration for every family. So whether a patient has commercial insurance or government health-funded insurance through Medicaid, Medicaid CHIP, or a combination of plans, NS support is here to help families find ways to make treatment more affordable. And that's on an individual basis. If for some reason a patient is without insurance, NS support has a patient assistance program to help uninsured patients find financial need. We can do that through support of medication and also referral to various foundations. This is done and initiated through an application. The application can be found at the viltepso.com site right now. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a start form. This is an image of the start form on the right-hand side of this slide. So start form can be found also at the viltepso.com website. So when a signed and completed patient start form is received by NS support, we will then initiate a benefit investigation and help to determine the patient's eligibility based on that insurance and other programs that NS support has, like copay assistance program. We will contact the patient's caregiver or parents when we've completed this benefit investigation and have a welcome call to walk through the results of that benefit investigation, as I mentioned earlier. So in summary, and this is, you'll see the phone number there on the right-hand side, NS support will provide comprehensive care coordination for patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers. You'll be able to reach a care manager and a case manager, as I mentioned earlier, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. And the phone number is 833-677-8778. So that's a brief summary of the NS support platform. And I believe, Jillian, at this time, we have an opportunity to field some questions.
Yes, we have some questions. Let me start here. I have a question from Janet. It's, what about older non-ambulatory men that could be treated with VILTEPSO?
If the question is with regard to insurance coverage, if that's where the question is directed, then obviously we will verify that patient's benefits based on their individual insurance, and we'll be able to report back to the physician and to the parent that what those insurance criteria are based on each individual patient's situation.
And then
if it's medical, then it's back to you, Jillian.
Yeah, on the other side, if it's regarding clinical trials, NS Pharma additional trials, including trials in non-ambulatory patients with Duchenne's, are under internal review and consideration, and eventually NS Pharma will provide any updates regarding the possibility of running these trials in non-ambulatory patients. There's another question by Lindsay, and her question is, what is the youngest age they would be able to start taking VILTEPSO? And as we saw regarding our clinical trials, the youngest age and the inclusion criteria for those patients was 4 years of age, but this is something that needs also to be discussed with the treating physician and the healthcare professional. I don't know if Randy, you know this one, but there's another question by Janet. And her question is, when is this coming to Europe and the UK?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you on that. I'm part of the U.S. commercial team, so that my only purview is that we had the medication approved recently by the FDA, and thankfully for that, we're able to commercialize in the U.S. With regard to ex-U.S. launch, I don't really have an answer on that particular one.
And I guess that that answer will also help Dara, who asks how can she have access to viltolarsen in India as well.
Yeah, again, I don't have an answer for that. That would be referred to our headquarters office.
There's a question by Michelle, who's asking, how soon do you expect the drug to be ready for patients?
Well, I think the drug is ready for patients as soon as we can get the payer to approve it for each individual patient. It is right now available in the U.S., and I would encourage you to speak with your physician, submit the start form, and let's see how quick we can get the patient on therapy. It is ready for utilization in the U.S. today.
a question by Michelle, which is, can we start the drug in a center and then change to home infusions?
That's a great question, and one that is a practice that we see fairly regularly. A lot of times, therapy is initiated in the Center of Excellence and then goes to home infusion. That's a discussion that you would have with your physician. We would verify each individual patient's benefits on different sites of care to see what that insurance coverage would look like. But transitioning from one site of care to another is definitely a conversation between you and your physician.
We have another question regarding, when do you anticipate exon 44 skipping to begin trials in the US? We were told previously it would be by 2020. We have at the moment exon 44 skipping therapy on our pipeline, but for further information, we would have to wait for NS Pharma's updates regarding that trial. We don't have any at the moment. Let me see if there are any more questions. Don't have any more questions at the moment. Oh, here I have one. Can NS Pharma provide assistance with insurance approval and switching from the Serato exon 53 skipper?
Yeah, how that would initiate would be, it goes back to the start form. Our job at NS Support is to look at the coverage that you all would have based on your insurance for each individual patient. So for any patients initiating therapy on VILTEPSO, it all starts at the same place. So what we would do, and that, to answer your question, is we would contact the payer and research the benefits for VILTEPSO, and if there are any criteria that they mention in that benefit investigation, we would certainly pass that on to you and your physician. But it's a fairly straightforward process with gaining authorization by your payer.
We have another question here. Understanding that your measurement of dystrophin levels was different than that used by Serato, can you explain how the level of dystrophin found in your study compares to that of Serato's study? We have no clinical trials comparing head-to-head our outcomes with the other exon 53 skipping therapy, but the way our analysis and the measurement of dystrophin was done through Western blot is through standardized techniques and also an FDA approved level of measurement of that dystrophin level as well. Questions. I have another question here. What is your pricing, and can NS Pharma assist families that cannot afford the medication?
Yeah, so on the assistance for financially, it's a great question, and it's one that comes up all the time. So we want to make the product affordable for every patient, and the medication price varies by weight of the child, as Jillian mentioned. It's at 80 milligrams per kilo dose. But that aside, the cost is only important, I think, to what it costs from an out-of-pocket perspective. And for patients that are eligible and they're commercially insured, there's an out-of-pocket program that we have to assist patients. And as I mentioned earlier, if they're government pay, we can refer patients to foundation, and we also have for the non-insured a patient assistance program. So we think we have a pretty comprehensive platform to assist patients with out-of-pocket needs relative to VILTEPSO.
Okay, waiting for more questions. There's another question by Bruce. Can non-US patients purchase the medication as they can with Serato products?
Can non-US patients purchase? We cannot ship medication from the US outside the United States. So if the question is, if I live outside the US, can you purchase it from within the US? The answer is no. Any patients that do live outside the US to gain treatment to VILTEPSO would have to come to the US and have a dialogue with a US physician. It's the only way I know to get it to you.
We have another question by Kay regarding Exxon 54. When do you think NS Pharma will give an update on Exxon 44 skipping? Would this be done in another webinar? Exxon 54 skipping therapy is still on our pipeline, but we don't have any information yet regarding when it will begin. And another question by Bruce. Will you research the Serato programs that are supplying medication to patients outside the US and implement similar?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah,
will we do research for insurance outside the US?
I think it's more directed towards the way to provide therapies outside of the US. That's the way I think Serato is going.
I see. Julian and I don't have an answer on that one. Outside the US, we would have to refer those questions to our headquarters. And as mentioned, we're US commercial folks, so we don't really get involved ex-US.
Julian, I did want to mention too, Danielle shared a few questions from parents offline in the chat area. If you could read off some of those as well.
Outside of the chat. Oh, okay. There's a question. Can you provide a data slide comparing VILTEPSO to Vyondys as far as dystrophin production or even links to the public data? We do not have, as we mentioned, any studies regarding the comparison of our outcomes head to head with other competitors. And we just, as we mentioned before, our dystrophin production for our patients that were given 80 milligrams per kilogram, there was an increase of baseline from 0.6 to 5.9% of dystrophin production. But we don't have any comparison that we can do head to head to Serato's Vyondys. There's a question. We were supposed to start Vyondys this week or next. Insurance approved. What happens if we want to switch? How do we go about that? I do have the doctor. I think they're planning on switching.
Sure. So Yeah, before obviously initiation of any therapy, the payer has to issue an authorization for that, which your doctor would have given you for the other product. You would have to do the same thing for VILTEPSO. So the payer would have to approve VILTEPSO for use in your specific patient. So we can help you with that research by, again, we're back to the start form, but it's up to you and your physician. If the physician wants to switch, you together have to fill out the start form. We'll research those benefits for you. And then the doctor would have to submit a letter of medical necessity to enable the switch in the same way that they initiated approval for the first product. So it follows really the same path.
Another question from the chat: will there be an age limitation for receiving therapy? Especially, will non-ambulatory patients will be able to get it? So regarding the data from our trials, and we just what we reviewed is from patients that are our phase 2 trials, from patients that are 4 and less than 10 years of age, and there are studies from patients that are 4 to less than 8 years of age. There's another question about the cost of the therapy, Randy.
Sure.
There are rumors that the expense of the cost of the drug. I don't know if they were able to hear your answer.
Oh, I see. Oh, I'm sorry. So, yeah, the cost of the medication varies obviously by patient weight, and our medication, VILTEPSO, is given at 80 milligrams per kilo, so it'll vary quite a bit. And then whatever your insurance is, will have some sort of requirement for a copay or a coinsurance or even a deductible. And whatever that copay, coinsurance, deductible looks like, we'll be able to help you find solutions for out-of-pocket assistance for those out-of-pocket expenses. So that's our job at NS Support. Whatever your insurance is, to help you navigate assistance for those out-of-pocket expenses.
There's another question. I have heard of doctors declining to assist patients in switching to your product. Can you do anything to make switching easier or encourage doctors to assist in switching?
I think that our job at NS Pharma is to communicate to these physicians, what the benefits are and the clinical data that we're permitted to communicate to them. And it's really up to you all and the physician to decide what's the best medication and path forward for each patient. So that's what we're permitted to do, is to communicate what we can to the provider. And as a patient or a parent, certainly that's a dialogue that you would need to have with your doctor, what you all think is the best product for them, and it's up to the doctor to initiate the therapy.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is Danielle Edwards again. I think if there's no more questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up this presentation. Julian and Randy, thank you so much for your presentation and answering all those questions. It's been very helpful, and I think will benefit many in the community. Congratulations again, NS Pharma. Jeff Foundation is so excited, and we're looking forward to see all the amazing things that you do for the Duchenne community. Again, thank you all attendees for joining us today. This presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our website. For any of you who would like to watch it again after, or share it with others in the community who could benefit. For any other questions, please feel free to email me or Jeff Foundation after this. We can connect you with any other people from NS Pharma if you have any other questions you would like to ask or would like more information on. But for the most part, thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a great day, and thank you again, NS Pharma.